Jen Mall, and welcome to Nurse Connect. I am an RN and a board certified nurse coach. I believe that connecting with others is essential to living a happy and fulfilled life, and that sharing our stories not only helps us to heal ourselves, but also helps others by inspiring hope and optimism. I am so grateful to share stories of these incredible nurses on their journey, and I encourage you to find a way to share yours too. Thanks for listening in. Hey everyone, we'll jump onto this week's podcast in just a moment. But real quick, if you're a nurse coach or a leader and are interested in developing a hospital-based nurse coaching and wellness program, then I would love for you to join me in my Facebook group, Hospital-Based Nurse Coaching and Wellness Programs. In this group, we share best practices and resources, as well as trainings to help you develop a successful program, which will decrease turnover and burnout, as well as increase employee satisfaction. Of course, we know this leads to decreased serious safety events and improved patient experience. I have got a free mini course that I can send you to get started on this journey. I will drop the link below, and I hope to see you inside the group. Have a great day. Bye. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Nurse Connect podcast. I'm Jen Mall, and I'm happy to have Todd here with me today. Welcome, Todd.
Oh, thank you. Welcome.
Hey, I'm excited to chat with you today. You have a super interesting journey. We connected with on a mutual friend's book launch. Shout out to Jessica, who just launched her book, Shit They Don't Tell You in Nursing School, which is an incredible book. I just finished reading it last week. So excited that we get to chat now.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And her journey is pretty great. And I was blessed to be part of the launch and part of her team that looked at some of the data. And no, I'm blessed to be here. And thank you for having me on. It's always good to like connect with nurses and just not forget that, right?
Mhm.
It's such a challenge. And I've been a nurse. I think about it. I'm like, man, it's been almost 30 years.
Wow, incredible. I know, right? When you start saying that, you're like, dang, has it been that
I'm
long?
like, what's going on? And I've been like, I don't know if it's a blessing or not, but I've been the one that tried a lot of things.
Cool. Cool.
Like I just didn't do this straight runway. I bounced to different things, and I'm not sure if it was popular or not, but I come with a wealth of different experiences that was interesting, and I just acquired some clients now that are outside of that. So, for me, I didn't grow up like, hey, I wanted to be a nurse or
Hmm.
anything like that. I kind of grew up like, hey, I'm going to be a baseball player
Nice.
or something of
Yeah.
that nature. And, I had a little too much fun at the end of high school and into college. And I kind of honestly, almost failed out. Like I just wasn't
Wow.
ready. And my dad
Yeah.
was like, listen, I'm not paying for you to go to school. And so I had a bunch of friends that were like, their parents were paying for them to go to all these schools. I'm
Hmm.
like, what am I going to do? And this was like, I'm going to say 80s, late 80s. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? Like wait tables. And I couldn't
Yeah.
get student loans. Like the rules were different, right? Like
Hmm.
my parents made too much money to like qualify for this
Yeah.
stuff. So I joined the army. Like
Ah.
and it was like the Army National Guard in my state. And they had this thing if you join. I actually was going to join the reserves, but my stepbrother was joining the guard and he goes, why wouldn't you do the guard? Because they have tuition assistance.
Ah, smart.
Yeah, so when I was like doing all this, I didn't even know I wanted to go into nursing, but what happened was like in the army, they're like, well, what MOS, that's your specialty, did you
Okay.
want to be? And I was like, oh, I like something medical. So I became a medic.
Okay.
So then I'm like, all right, now what? And like my grandfather always used to say, hey, you should go to medical school,
Mm.
like, like that's just.
It's a lot of work.
And I know like I'm gonna date myself with this, right? So I get there and I said, maybe nursing, but I wanted to be on the flight rescue,
Cool.
right?
Yeah.
Like, this was like when that movie, like Stallone with Cliffhanger back in the day. Like, I think it's an 80s movie. Like, and like it's like
I
on
want to be
Netflix
that
again.
guy.
And I was like, I want to be that dude that goes up like with that pack and
Yeah.
flies on helicopters and does all this. So honestly, that was my inspiration. No joke, right? So I come back from like boot camp and all that stuff, and I love the military. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And it really dialed me into school. And
Hmm.
I had to do I went right for a bachelor. So you have to do all the prerequisites.
Okay.
And back then, and it still is today, is like it's very challenging to get into a nursing program.
Hmm.
Like you gotta like really get after it,
Yeah.
and now like retrospect, like I see the design for that, like
Hmm.
because there's a lot of things that are hard as a nurse that school could weed you out if you can't
Yeah.
handle,
Yeah.
you
That's a
know
good point.
so I made it in, I did it, and I qualified in between junior and senior year for an internship. Kind of, they had that role, and it was at Yale
Wow.
Haven. And I was lucky, I was blessed. I was on a cardiology floor. And then when I graduated, it was funny. My nurse manager was like, listen, I don't know if we could offer it. Like, there wasn't like a shortage. It was weird. Like,
Hmm.
so I was like, oh my God, I got to try to
Yeah.
find a job. So me and my girlfriend at the time just kind of packed our bags and like camped and backpackers for cross
Oh,
country
wow. Oh,
like
nice.
a month and a half. We're like, hey, we'll just like plant like a flag somewhere,
Where we can
you
get a
know?
job.
Yeah, like
That's
we'll figure it
amazing.
out. Like, and we had a blast. It was a good time. But
Yeah.
halfway through, my nurse manager called me or I called the floor or something. She was like, because we didn't have cell phones back then,
Yeah.
which is a blessing, probably.
Yeah. Yes.
So she's like offered me a job, and I was like, all right. So I did it. I was in a hospital nurse, cardiology, saw a lot of different things,
Hmm.
and it was interesting. And then I'm like, well, if I want to get the flight nurse, I have to go to the ICU. So
Hmm.
I go to the ICU, and I did it. It was tough. I did it for a few years, and I was just burned out.
Mm.
And I had a friend I went to nursing school with, and he went out and got into like medical sales
Hmm.
in the corporate world. He's like, Todd, you got to do this. And he goes, they're making boatload of money. We're not in the hospital. And I said, all right. And you think it would have been easy, but it's not. Like they would rather hire into medical devices somebody who is successful at selling copiers
Mm.
than
Because they're good at
somebody
selling.
that they're good at selling.
Okay.
So they could teach people medical products,
Right.
and I was like, I was shocked. And it actually was hard for a nurse to do this, like, because there was a certain mindset that nurses have that sometimes don't lead to selling. They're more
Yes.
so attached to their clinical stuff
Yes.
that to make a leap on understanding this was hard, it took a lot of extra work, but I did it, and I was successful for a bit.
Nice.
I won some sales awards. I kind of was interested, and there were some pretty high level sales teams that I was involved in,
Hmm.
and then but my stepping stone was like a clinical specialist. A lot of
Mm.
nurses go into clinical specialists, but they're high travel jobs,
Yeah.
and I was like traveling all over the country, and I was burned out. And so
Hmm.
I had a little hiatus with my ICU experience. I started doing the contracted work with those agencies. I'm like, yeah, I'll
Hmm.
just go and do that. And I did that for a while. So it was pretty cool. I think that was great. So I did some clinical spec jobs with companies,
Hmm.
and you have to kind of understand how the corporate world works, which is
Yeah. Money,
interesting.
money.
Yeah, and and just like you look at the levels of leadership in healthcare, and then in corporate healthcare, it's very different too.
Hmm.
So, um, so I did medical sales for a little bit, and I actually did it probably for almost 10 years. So I haven't
Wow.
been at the bedside for a
Yeah.
long time. So
Yeah. So to go back, that's tough.
interesting story was I was in a company and then it was a large company. They downsized. So I lost my sales position.
Mm.
And then I got into a startup from this guy that had some proven success out of California. And I did well with it, but it wasn't going to make it. So I'm like,
Mm.
what are I going to do? So my neighbor worked as a nurse for the local VNA, and they're like, they're hiring for business development. So I did
Huh.
business
Yeah.
development for a home care agency. I was
That's
like,
cool.
yeah. So it was interesting. So I started transitioning patients
Yeah.
from the skilled nursing facilities to home care, and
Hmm.
then calling on physicians about kind of referrals. And I did a
Yeah.
whole bunch of that, like, which I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I wasn't near making the money I was
Yeah.
used to.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what am I going to do to kind of bridge the gap? And I made friends in these nursing homes. So
Hmm.
believe it or not, I got into like supervisor at a nursing home. Like, what am I doing? What am I? And not being at the bedside for like
Yeah.
10 years, I'm like, oh my God, because you're dropping Foley's, you're doing all this other stuff. Right?
Wow.
So I did that. And it was interesting. It kind of bridged the gap, and I'm like, wow,
Hmm.
this is hard work. Like
Yeah.
this skilled nursing facility, I'm like, whew. And I only did it like maybe two days a week,
Yeah.
like bridging that gap. And I was like, oh my God. So I started to understand the healthcare environment from a home care agency. I just made some friends in this team that I was in.
Hmm.
And they moved me around the state because it started to become the largest healthcare VNA in the state because they were
Wow.
bought by the system. So I started to do a lot of work. And some of the leadership was like, wow, you got good experience with physicians because we had to role play for our jobs at one point. And so they thought this nurse was going to walk in like tripping over his words. And one of the VPs was like, oh my God, you're good at this. I said, this is my wheelhouse. So,
Yeah. I
like,
can actually do
I
this.
like I know this stuff. Like, so you got a nurse that could sell, right?
Yeah.
And so to make a long story short, I stayed there for a bit, and I had a friend in sales that became a VP of the
Mm.
clinical team of nurses
Wow.
for a company. He's like, Todd, I want to bring you in, and I need to grow this thing. So I did that, and he wound up leaving abruptly. And I was like, oh, and in the
Yeah.
process, I was creating my own business. I was doing
Ah.
some health coaching on the side in my own business, and I was doing quite well. And that was my goal, was I really wanted to buy freedom, like
Hmm.
freedom from a boss. I wanted my own thing. And I think a lot of nurses want that.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, what can I do that isn't going to ground pound me and that I'm passionate about?
Yeah.
And so I've learned a lot of the mistakes that people make, and I learned a lot of mistakes that nurses make, and they seem to have been reaching out to me lately, like, how do I do this? And I'm
Yeah.
like, I've got some success through a ton of my failures for sure.
Yes. Yeah. You do kind of have to work through a lot of that.
You so do. So while I was in that company, I was building my business, which
Hmm.
was good. And then I had another friend who, and here's me taking a risk. He was a chef, and he created products for people.
Okay.
So say you were like, hey, I want to make a smoothie beverage drink that's got wellness properties. You
Yeah.
could go to this guy, and he'd like, hey, I could put this together. We could put a framework together so you can mass produce it and do this. And like
Yeah.
at that time, CBD was popular. Remember when
Uh-huh.
CBD first came out? People were like, hey, I want CBD shots. I want this. I want all that.
Hmm.
So we were helping to develop. So I left a corporate job that I was kind of traveling, just doing really well, helping the reps and doing some sales, and I left that, and I was like, I'm on my own here. I actually cobraed my benefits. I had my other business, and I'm working with this guy who's a friend of mine, and this other guy. So we do that, and his business is starting to tank.
Oh no.
I'm like, oh my God. So this is kind of the weird story. It's so I'm sitting there, and I'm building my business, and I did it through social media. So I
Mm-hmm.
reconnected with a friend who I was doing the business development with the home care agency. And
Okay.
she's like, Todd, I need some help in this large health system that I used to work for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm creating a revenue stream all by myself. And one of the leaders saw it and wants to develop it. And it's called geriatric care management.
Oh,
A lot of people don't know what that is. And basically what it is, it's a paid, you're a paid care, like almost like a paid family member. Like
okay.
somebody pays you
That's cool.
and you met quarterback their whole healthcare life.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's awesome. And but you're not doing the care. Like it's not like
Mm-hmm.
they're paying me to go like, hey, this person may need like home health aides, or you're driving them to appointments. Like you're involved because either the family's across the country,
Yeah.
they may not have family, but a conservator's paying,
Mm-hmm.
or there's families just not that engaged and they don't want to do it. And so you got some people, so it's cash. It's not like
That's
an
great.
insurance,
Yeah.
which is an amazing role. And my friend did it in Florida. So it's like popular in different parts of the country, apparently. And so out here, I'm in New England. It wasn't, some people were doing it, but she was masterful. And I said, yeah. She goes, can you do it per diem? I'm like, oh, I need it. I was like,
Yeah.
okay. But kind of God works here. Like
Yeah.
2 before I was going to start, she goes, Todd, I really need somebody full time.
Perfect. I'm
Like,
in.
oh my God, this is great. And I can still work my business. But that job
Yeah.
taught me so much because we were always on call. Like this
Yeah.
was like people, like if something happened in the middle of the night, we're it.
Mm.
So it was a lot of work, but
Yeah.
we did it together and
Mm.
it was great. And so they wanted to grow it and the core, the system, but when too many cooks are in it, it kind of started
Mm-hmm.
to fizzle. But I did it for a while. So partway through this journey, and this is COVID. So all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden COVID happens and it just blows the doors off
Yeah.
everything. We're in, I don't even have to go there. So one day I'm with a paid client and he was had really not much family and he had some dementia. And I'm sitting there and I'm about 5 feet from him and his whole face went blurry. And I was like, oh my God, what's
Mm.
going on? So I thought it was the darn mask. Maybe I'm dehydrated. It lasted like 5 minutes. So I call I get out, my girlfriend's a nurse. I call my girlfriend. I said, yeah, it's just weird. She goes, you should
Yeah.
call your doctor. I'm one of those that like, hey, rub some dirt on it, went away, you'll be fine, right? But I decided to call my doctor. So the medical the med assistant called me and said, the doctor wants to see you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you come tomorrow? And of course I'd have been like, well, I'm so busy. But I said, yeah, I probably should come. And so he said too to call your eye doctor. So I called the eye doctor, and the eye doctor doesn't even see me. He says, you have an ocular migraine, probably. I said,
Hmm.
listen, I don't get headaches unless I don't have
Yeah.
cough. Right. So I was like, um, so in the midst of this, I like to do mixed martial arts stuff. So I was training for an event. I get a good friend who's a chiropractor. I was going to get tuned up. I tell him the story, and he goes, "Dude, what are you, like a moron? Like with that vision, you should have went to the ER, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know." He goes, he started telling me these things. I was like, "Ah, yeah." And at the time, I'm what, 40, I was 48 at the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I've had friends that were pretty healthy and that had strokes out of nowhere,
Yeah.
like, and so these things were ringing in my brain. So I go to see my doctor the following day, and he's like, Todd, the way insurance works, we got to do like a carotid ultrasound, try to see, and we'll go that. But he goes, but if anything weird happens, just go to the ER. And I said,
Yeah.
okay. So in the next few days, I'm like running. I live on a lake, so I go for a 3 mile run. I come back and took a shower, and I'm sitting in front of a Zoom, and my hand just went like, it just felt weird. It was just like, man, like I was looking at it, it was moving, but it just felt like
Mm-hmm.
lack of communication. And so I called my girlfriend. I said, I'm just going to go to a local hospital down like 20 minutes away. It's a small one. And, just let them know. And I figured
Mm-hmm.
they say you're working too hard. You know what I mean? Like, hey, so I go in there. It's not acute post COVID, but it's like in September of the
Yeah,
COVID year. So it's still kind of weird,
for
you
sure.
know? And so I go there, you're wearing a mask in there and they do the stroke workup, typical. Hey, let me send you for the scans, we're going to put you in MRI. And so halfway through the MRI, they're like, oh, the neurologist wants to add contrast. And so I'm there. I'm like, okay, this may not be good, but it could be anything. They just maybe forgot it. So I get into back to the ER bay. So I'll never forget this. The nurse comes in and this doctor, she's a female doctor, she sits next to me and she goes, Todd, you're not going crazy. You got a marble-sized tumor in your head.
Mm,
And I was like, what? I was
shoot.
like, yeah. So I kind of stood up. I walked across the little room I was in. I was lucky to be in a room with all the COVID stuff. And like this, like a tear. I go, this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So I turned to them and I'll never forget this. Both said, like, I'm so sorry. And I was in their shoes.
Yeah,
I would have probably said the same thing.
right.
But I just felt like, man, like I was dead already.
Yeah.
You know
Ugh,
what I mean? Like, man, I am
sucks.
so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a game changer.
Mm,
Like it was the biggest game changer ever. I was like, oh my God. All of a sudden, the world's like he just got this sucker punch out of nowhere. And I was like,
yeah,
but it later, like it turned out to be kind of the biggest blessing in
really.
a lot of different things in so many ways. So the world stood still, and of course, everyone's on you, like, hey, we're gonna admit you, we're gonna do this, right? And so this guy comes in, he's a neurosurgeon. He goes, I don't do brains, I don't do spines. You could tell he's like ready to go for the weekend. He's like, the guy who does brains, and I'm in a small hospital. It's not like this big, like,
Yeah.
hey, like you guys actually do brains here, right? You know what I mean? It's like a community hospital. It's decent. They got an ICU or two, but nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wind up admitting me, and I'm like a nurse's dream. I'm not on any meds. You know what I mean? Like I'm not on anything. So all of a sudden, like all I cared about was just talking to people. Like
Mm-hmm.
just like the transporters were like, hey, how you doing? Like, what's up? I'm like, it was just like a very interesting experience.
Mm-hmm. I bet.
And I was just like the person who's like, of course they work you up, like, hey, we're gonna do like an echo. And they were keeping me NPO because they thought they were gonna biopsy my brain. And my
Mm,
stepsister was a nurse. I'm calling her, she worked in neuro, and she's like, and I got a couple friends that are doctors, and they're like, dude, why, if it's gotta come out, like, why would you even just drill a hole in your head? Like,
yeah,
so I didn't know this. So anyway, the next day, the guy who does the brains comes in. He's super nice guy, rolls in the scanner.
really.
Yeah,
They're usually very interesting. I worked in a
they,
trauma neuro ICU. The neuro guys are interesting.
and it was really interesting because he was really nice. He comes in,
That's
he goes,
awesome.
yeah, he goes, we're trying to build the brain program here, and I'm sure he's great at it. He goes,
Yeah.
Todd, I don't know what this is. We could
Oh,
biopsy it. I could present it to the tumor board. And meanwhile, my girlfriend's losing her mind. My ex-wife,
yeah.
she's a super amazing nurse practitioner, and
Mm.
she's like, Todd, this is crazy. Like everyone's like, this is nuts, and I'm like, this is nuts.
Yeah, it is.
It's
It
nuts. It's
sucks.
like, and then it sucks. I'm like, I might not be here that long. Like, I don't like
Mm.
all of a sudden, like, your goals. How people like
Yeah.
your 5 year goals. I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
man, if
Facing your
I'm
mortality. That's,
totally looking
oh,
at this, I'm like, holy cow, like, so. I said, I'm gonna get another opinion at Hartford, which is our
hmm,
large institution. And my girlfriend's Googling brain surgeons up there. You know what I
yeah.
mean? So he goes, can I make a recommendation? I said, sure. And he recommended this guy. And literally, this was I was Friday morning. He goes, they didn't need to admit you. Like they could have sent you home last night.
Yeah.
Like this was the guy said. He goes, since you're here, we'll do all these crazy tests that we need to do.
Sure.
And of course, they have oncology come in because usually brain tumors are secondary to some
Hmm.
cancer going on somewhere.
Hmm.
So they did all this stuff, and that was, he goes, and then we'll discharge it, which was fine. So I called from my bed there to that neurosurgeon. He saw me that Monday,
Oh, wow.
which was amazing.
Yeah.
And he was the chief of neurosurgery at Hartford Hospital, which is our largest and probably in the state, aside from
Hmm.
Yale. But so I walk up there to his office, and I must have said this 4 times. I actually know I said this. And I used an expletive and I said, "This effing sucks."
Yeah.
4 times, like a couple tears. I said, "No," I said, "This is hard. This is effing hard." He goes, "Todd,
Yeah.
it's hard."
It is.
And so he said, "Todd, I don't know what it is, but
Hmm.
it's got to come out."
Hmm.
So he put me on steroids, sent me home,
Mm.
and he's like, "My team's going to reach out. We're going to do brain surgery." And I was like, man. So you got this gap, 49. And I'm like, I don't have a will. So I'm getting my will.
Mm.
I'm just talking to people.
Hmm.
I'm just saying, like, the thing that was cool, I was blessed because I live on a lake. It just sat, people came and visited, and we just had just
Mm.
conversations, just connecting deeply with people. And it taught me in that 2 week period, like we had COVID going on, so I had to manage that. But did a lot of walking, and I said, God, like, what are you trying to teach me here? Like,
Hmm.
what's this here to show me? And I would have
Hmm.
never asked that question. Like, who asked that question? But it came to my mind. And I listened to enough podcasts, and I said, it was like, man, I was living my life like my foot was on the brake and the gas at the same.
Hmm.
And it didn't need to be. Like, opened my eyes to levels and layers of trauma that I had that I never realized I had,
Yeah.
because I'm somebody that ate well and exercised, but I missed that part where, like, I was always working like I was going to live in a box tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't need to. I'm like, I'm not poor, I'm not rich, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
My mind had me thinking every day. And it was like, and I always listen to certain podcasts, and I listen to a lot of military, like Navy SEAL guys.
Hmm.
And this one guy was on there, and his story really transformed me. And he talked a lot about the PTSD, but in his earlier life and how that manifests. And
Mm.
I never put a label on how I was until, like, that piece just brought it to light for me.
Wow. Hmm.
And yeah, it was an interesting experience. And he put me on steroids, which was probably the worst part of the whole thing, because
Really?
yeah,
Worse than the brain surgery.
it honestly, like, it was. And I'll share the story. So interesting, like, so we got COVID, so you need to, like, get tested 2 weeks before
Yeah.
the hospital. So in the hospital, like, I'm at this large facility. And as nurses, here's the nurse stuff, right? Like, they lose your stuff if you ever bring any valuables. It's always lost. You're done. And then you're trying to find, like, oh, it was in this safe on this floor. Somebody had it here, and nobody ever finds it. So, and then people complain and write letters to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I can't. So literally, my girlfriend couldn't be there. So the funny thing is they called and they said, your case is at like 6:30. And I'm like, cool, I get an early case. I wake up that morning and I said to myself, I go, I was up at like 4 in the morning. And I'm like, man, what's worse? Like, I feel like I was getting up to go to boot camp. Like,
Mm.
they get you up early to go. And I said, what's worse? And I actually said boot camp was worse, because with this, at least I know I'm going to be, like, I have to put faith in somebody
Yes.
else. Like, because
Yeah.
it's like, I'm going to be asleep.
Yeah.
So the steroids messed my stomach up. So I'm feeling like,
Mm.
how the old people, remember when you're a nurse, you're like, they're always worried about their bowels.
Yeah.
Like, I was that guy. I'm like, oh my God, the consummate, I'm gonna, like, I can't go. Like, I think something's gonna happen. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, the steroids messed with my brain so much that way. So I'm going there. I hand everything to my girlfriend. No cell phone, nothing. I get there and they check me in. I put in paper Johnny. They throw an IV, and they're like, and this was like 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
They're like, your case isn't until 11.
Oh.
but we had to have you here because we have to do special tiger whatever mapping of your brain
Okay, okay.
or so this. So I'm literally staring at the wall, other than they do the scan that takes 20 minutes, and literally staring at the wall from like 6:30 to like 10:30, 11.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm dry because you're MPO,
Yeah.
right? I'm steroided out, and I'm like, at least can you give me a
This
bag
is
of
the
food?
worst. Yeah.
I'm like, give me a bag,
Oh,
give me
those mouth
something.
swabs.
Yeah, it was a mess. And then I'm like, I still haven't gone to the bathroom. I'm like freaking out in my head. So anesthesia comes out, and I'm telling the anesthesia, he must have thought I was nuts. He goes, Todd, don't worry, we'll get you all right. So the surgeon comes out and he goes, Todd, he goes, I'm glad you decided to have this. I'm like,
Oh,
did I have a choice? Like, it's like I'm gonna die or like do this,
yeah.
right? And he's kind of joking around. So he goes, "Oh, we're just turning over the room and we'll bring you in." So they bring you in, and I've done OR like with medical device companies. I've
Mm-hmm.
been in the ORs with stuff, and in our career, like I worked in CT ICU cardiothoracic, so I used to go in and see some hearts and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm in there, and they did the huddle while I was awake. So I'm like, he goes, "We're gonna do this and this and this and this." And I'm like, next thing,
I don't even know
like
what I want to know that.
so like my first goal, like, and I'm gonna back up a step. My first goal in this whole thing was to live through the surgery and
Hmm.
know my name and move all my extremities. I
Yeah,
could have
yeah.
cared less what the thing was at that point. That
Yeah.
was like these steps I took mentally with it. So I sit there, and all of a sudden I wake up in the PACU and I'm hungry. I'm like, oh my God, I'm looking, I'm alive.
Oh,
Holy crap. Because he didn't know if I would have been in the ICU or not. He goes, Todd, I don't
yeah.
know. And I looked down and I'm like, I got a Foley. This sucks. And like just dumb stuff. So he allowed my girlfriend to come in, and he comes and he goes, Todd, he goes, I got 99% of it out.
Mm, thank
And I was like,
God.
okay. He goes, everything went well. He goes, but we're not sure what it is yet.
Really?
He goes, we did a section. They're saying inflammatory cells. And you could tell he was always like, this guy's an amazing
Yeah.
doctor. He's an Indian guy. His name is Qureshi, and he's just awesome. Like I
Hmm.
couldn't, his bedside manner and he's just an amazing guy. And he's like, Todd, he goes, yeah, once we got to send it out for further tests. So I was just like, all right, whatever. I was just dealing with life.
Yeah.
And I thought I would stay in the PACU because the ICUs with all this COVID, but they wound up sending me to a step down unit. And of course, I was like messed up. Like, you're still getting from the surgery. And there's a girl young enough to be my daughter's the nurse, like, and she's coming at me. Like, imagine this. And like the time I get to the floor, because the PACU nurses were like on top of it.
Yeah.
And they're boom, they're like awesome. Hey, we'll get you this. They're all, I'm like, can I stay here the whole time?
Yeah.
So this other nurse, and she was great, she young girl, and she comes at me with like sub-Q heparin. I go, listen, I don't want heparin. I just said brain surgery, right? I was like half in and out of it. And she goes, no, we do this. And so the nurse practitioner came in. I said, like, is this legit? And she's like, yeah. And I said, can I get this catheter out of my bladder? And it was a silicone catheter. I used to work for Bard Medical. They're the Foley people.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
know everything about darn Foleys. And it was a temp sensing catheter. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. So the nurse is there. And one of the things I hated when I was a nurse was when you took care of patients and family members that were nurses and they were just difficult. And they were always like, I know. Like,
Just
I
giving you
never,
feedback and
yeah, like I never wanted to be that kind of guy. And I said this to the girl. I said, listen, I'm cool. Like, and I was very nice about things. I said, do you know how to take one of these catheters out? She goes, yeah. I said, well, silicone's very different. If you pull too hard on it, it could form a ridge and you could yank things, and I'm not going to be happy about it.
yeah.
I said, let me coach you on it. Meanwhile, of course, I'm all drugged up. I'm texting the rep because I know them. They're all on my phone. I go, dude, you couldn't sell latex catheters here. Like, why are they have silicone here? This is ridiculous. I'm doing this at 2 o'clock in the morning. The rep's actually getting back to me. He was somebody I knew. I was laughing. So I was like, oh my God. So I said, listen, deflate it slowly. And she goes, I never knew that. I said, that's why I told you. Here's another funny nursing story, right? So I'm working on a floor, and while I'm sitting on this floor, that's a step down unit for neuro, right? So the weirdest thing is that I never knew, being a nurse, that your skull bones don't heal. It's just they don't heal.
Really?
Yeah, they don't fuse together like you break a bone here, they fuse together. These don't.
I didn't realize that.
They clip
Huh.
things in to
Yeah.
hold things in place, but they sew the thing inside. So now it feels good. But you
Yeah.
literally feel like you got this big damn hole.
Oh.
You could feel it. It's strange.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there and I'm still, by the way, I'm still bowel obsessed. I'm a mess. They're giving me Dilaudid. That stuff doesn't work. I said, just give me Tylenol. Like, honestly, head stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
And some Colace.
yeah, like, give me, like, I was just a disaster. I was a disaster. Because even the doctor before, when he goes, when you're on steroids, you want to take Pepsid and
Yeah.
Senokines, right? So I was just like, okay, fair enough. But that stuff wasn't working. So I'm like, I
Ugh.
feel like I gotta go. Of course, I'm peeing because all the steroids are giving me fluids. So I have a commode and I'm sitting to go to the bathroom. And I can say this because I'm a nurse. So I'm going and I hear a squish in my head.
No.
I'm like, oh my God, I'm like freaking because they're telling you not to like do this, right? And it was the weirdest thing. And I'm like, I'm not flipping out, but I am flipping out. Like,
Yeah.
so I call the nurse. I go, listen. And nursing 101 for anyone's a nurse, listen to this, right? Act like you know what you're doing, right? So this girl comes in. So I go, oh my God, I felt a squish in my head. She goes, really? I've never heard of that before. And I'm like, really? Like, are you kidding me? So I'm like freaking out, whatever. So the PA comes in, the surgical PA. And so he goes, how you doing? I said, listen, I got to tell you the story. He goes, Todd, that stuff happens all the time. Don't worry about it.
Really?
I was like, thank you. But this nurse, I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, say, hey, yeah, no, you're fine. But go upstairs and say, hey, did you ever hear that before? You know what I mean? Like, so anyway, so that was this journey
Wow.
that was like, holy cow. And I'm blessed. But so he's like, I go, Dr. Qureshi, can you have like taken 100% out? You could have taken a little extra, right?
Mhm.
And I was lucky because he didn't guarantee. He said, Todd, I can't guarantee you'll get what you lost back. In
Mm.
all honesty, it wasn't that much,
Yeah.
but I got it back kind of,
Yeah.
and I didn't really lose anything. It was just this. He was the only guy who picked up the deficit in the first place.
Wow.
But he's like, before you get discharged, we got a PT and OT work with you, whatever.
Yeah.
And so he goes, I'd like to see you go to OT outpatient. So I went to OT, and anytime people look at my chart, they're like in amazement. They're like, you had a brain tumor. How'd you know? Like
Yeah.
everyone's like, because it's the proverbial brain tumor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
That's
hey, do I have a
sucks.
brain tumor?
Yeah.
And so that was a journey. And I told, and like I was all in the bed. Dr. Qureshi wound up seeing me the next day. I said, dude, what if it's cancer? He goes, Todd, I got 99% of it out. And
Mhm.
what's that? So I had to wait
Okay.
2 weeks to find out what it was. And it wasn't the best tumor. It
Yeah.
wasn't the worst. It was just the
Mhm.
middle of the road. So they have
Okay.
to watch it. Still, it's not cancer, but it could
Okay.
grow and do all this stuff. So he this post-op visits the PA, and that's when I learned about it. The follow-up visit then at the end is with him.
Mm.
And amazingly, he comes in, and you know what doctors, you're in doctor's office, they're kind of in, blah, 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 and then they're out. He just kind of sat with me. He goes, "Todd, man, what are you thinking?" I'm like, this is quite a journey. I said, Dr. Qureshi, this was crazy.
Mhm.
And he goes, I know. He goes, Todd, I got to say this. He goes, you're a lucky SOB. And he's such a
Yeah.
mild mannered guy.
Yeah.
He goes, I pulled a tumor out of a kid that was 31 and looked just like yours, no joke. And his
Mhm.
was a stoma.
Mm.
And he goes, man, you're a lucky SOB.
Yeah.
And I was like, just blessed.
Yeah.
And so with that, there were a lot of things in this journey, like I faced my death. Like, you ask people, I'm one of those that like looks at like what's my worst case scenario,
Yeah.
looking at death. So I'm like listening to the Bible series on the History Channel. all the Jesus stuff, all the near death experience of like I'm Netflixing this stuff like a lunatic, but I learned so
Yeah.
much. And I was like, wow, this is an awesome experience. I learned a bit and I learned what it's like
Mm-hmm.
to be in that spot. And so one of the big things, and I tell people this all the time, is like if you don't have some sort of disability protection,
Mm.
like I could have went from 0 to like like that's it. Like, can I not work again?
Yeah.
Like if you're in your own business, you need disability insurance. Like I was lucky. So here's the blessing. I had
Yeah.
that job and I was there for a year
Yeah.
where I got that disability, but it's still only a fraction
Right.
of the amount you're used to making. So I'm always big into having a side hustle that could grow because these are the things you have to be, that you should be
Just
concerned
in
about, right?
case. Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And so I know you've done some work with others now, from coming out of this. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, so I was a health coach, which I enjoyed, but I used to one of the things that I found when I was growing a business, I felt like I reached this spot like no
Mm.
matter I'm doing this work,
Mhm.
but I was stuck. Like, how can I get out of this? Like, and I started to understand like there's something subconsciously going on. So a
Mhm.
mentor of mine at the time introduced me to this habit finder, and it's a mathematical scientific assessment that
Oh,
measures
neat.
our habits of thinking.
Yeah.
And it's amazing thing. And people are like, how can this like do this? Like know this about me based on this.
Mhm.
Because a lot of these assessments that companies do, like, all these things, even like, what's that popular one that, Enneagram, like
Mhm.
everyone's self-diagnosing themselves because it's your perception of
Yeah.
things. This one like wants to know how the car runs based on questions you can't game.
That's cool.
So did that and I was like, wow. And I started to learn things that sabotaged and supported me.
Mhm.
And so I decided to really dive into that. So I started to coach people on a different level with that. Meanwhile, I kept I actually became because that job kind of went away because
Okay.
it just went away and I became a director of an assisted living and
Yeah.
I did that for a little bit and I was like, man, I gotta slow down because I'm
Yeah.
like, it's my mind. The lesson learned. I'm living my life like my foot's on the gas. Like I gotta do
Yeah.
all this
Slow
stuff.
down. Yeah.
So I said my girlfriend was doing home care, and in the process, I did home care visits when I was doing that thing. And some of the directors were like, "Todd, you're actually a good nurse," because they thought I was a sales guy, right? I'm like, "Yeah, I could do this, right?" You know. So I wound up doing nursing to kind of, just kind of have my
That's
hand in it,
great.
supplement things, and I did just starts of care, so I didn't run a caseload, so I did
Yeah.
starts and I did visits. And I noticed that I started to connect with certain patients that were
Mhm.
going through things that were hard.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I started to do, and this kind of parlays into the coaching was I learned my lesson on that one day in the ER when they said, I'm sorry. And I try to mindfully never say, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
So what I've done is when people are going through something hard like this, like I had a guy who's my age, brain tumor too, and
Mm.
his cancer, he didn't like there were some things, and I sat with him and I shared my story, and so the walls come down. They're like, you kind of
Mhm.
get this. I said, I kind of do,
Mhm.
right? And I said, this is hard. And I just allow them the space for
Yeah.
that. Like,
That's
this is totally
powerful.
hard. And I said, but we could do hard things. We could do them. And we could do this together. And what I've learned is some people, they don't need you to fix them.
Mhm.
And this could be anything in your life, right? They just need to know and be validated for what they
Yeah.
feel. Oh, that somebody's there to walk alongside them.
That's
And I
powerful.
think nurses need it, like nurses in their work. And I just did a post on LinkedIn. I said, healthcare needs less managers and more leaders and mentors.
Yeah.
Because nurses just manage. They manage patients and then they get promoted up and they manage people. And then they get promoted up and they manage other people. And it just
Right.
becomes management rather than leadership and mentorship. And I've just seen it, and I've seen it in my own experience, in my own life, and like watching this. And I still watch it because I do this coaching. So I help people that are stuck,
Yeah.
are doing the work. They feel like they may feel like a 2 or a 3 on the inside, but they're pretending they're like an 8 or a 9
Mm,
and everything's fine. And the reality is when we uncover they're not, and despite their best efforts, they can't figure out why. So I use this assessment as a tool which unlocks this and we work together. But with this, I stayed nursing
great.
because this part, who would have thought? And I said this to myself. I tell my girlfriend, I was like, why am I back to bedside nursing? Like, what am I doing? I'm 50 something, right? I'm back there. Like, I
Yeah.
was in corporate, like, I was doing all this. And it's funny, people look at me and I'm like, you know what? It's about like what the connection is. And so with this, I started to notice this with patients, certain
Hmm.
patients. I said, this is hard. And now what I've done over the last and I only do this part-time because my businesses are growing, is I'm doing hospice now,
Oh, wow.
which is really interesting.
Oh,
And people are like, and it's funny, people are like, oh, you do hospice? That's got to be hard.
mm-hmm.
And it's hard and it's not, right? So I use my experience and my story, and some people are like, holy crap. Then their walls drop. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, kind of know. I said, I kind of know, but I don't know because I'm not dying,
Yeah.
right? I'm not like 6 months I'm gonna have but there was a point I was. They're like, there's my scan looked a little sketchy, and they're like, people asking, this is a weird phenomenon. Imagine somebody asking you saying, hey, what's your 5-year goal? And you're like, man, I'm not sure the next scan is going to do that. So you're not even
Right.
thinking like it's a weird thinking process that you got to address. But one of the things about it that I've learned is that you just like, I just started to like learn that like the things that people worry about
Hmm.
don't matter. And I just had a guy, and
Yeah.
he's got an amazing following on Instagram, and he lives like 3 towns from me. He has almost the same journey as me, but his is a little, they got most of it, but his is cancer, and he's an
Mm,
amazing dude. And I had him on my podcast. And the one thing that we both said is that you know, all of the depression, all of like this anxiety that you have when you're faced with your mortality, you realize that that
mm,
overthinking stuff that you're thinking about, like 90% of that doesn't matter.
yep.
It doesn't matter. Like the stuff you're worried about, it doesn't matter.
Wow.
And so the hospice teaches me more about life than death. Like
Mm,
relatively. And I've learned this, like this is, and I had a supervisor who said this, like there's 3 things, and I did a post about this on LinkedIn. There's actually quite a few things. There's things that hospice teaches me, right? And one
hmm.
of it is like dying's not that hard. It's
Mm,
really not that hard. We make it very comfortable for people.
yeah.
It's living that's hard in a sense of this. Like, how, if you're into personal development, you hear all these things that just sound trite, but they just make sense. The people on their deathbed don't wish they worked more.
Hmm.
They wish they had more experiences and more connections with people.
Absolutely.
And when that busyness crops up, like, oh, I'm too busy. Like, I remember when I was sitting here waiting for my surgery, like, like people that reached out to me, like, oh my God, I remember in high school and we talked, like, these
Yeah.
memories that you have
Right.
are just that important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I've really tried to embrace the last few years coming out of my own burnout. It's just that making more time to spend with the people I care about and take care of myself rather than being so busy because that's stressful.
A busy's a disease. It's like a thing
Hmm.
that steals stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's been so much and like just stepping in and letting people know that you're there with them and their
Yeah.
pain.
Beautiful.
And nurses, and I've done this in my work, like I'm not a manager anymore. I'm not a leader anymore, but I'm a leader with my
Yeah.
team in the sense that, like, nurses are hard on each other. I hear that it's still the same in these floors,
Mm.
right? Like in the hospital, like, because I'm in some of these groups and some of these people that are big on LinkedIn in the nursing world
Yeah.
are
It's
like,
hard out
yeah, this,
there.
this is still going on. And I'm like, I could understand that, but now if you could just step into somebody else's world, check in with your own pain because you
Hmm.
got tons of it, honor it and see their pain and walk in it with them, then you could be a better coworker, you could be a better leader and just walk that journey. Because sometimes, like, we're all scared.
Yeah.
Like, you're doing something new, a new nurse is trying to put something in they never done before. Just like I had this preceptor like recently in hospice, and she's amazing. I'm like, she's just calm. She goes, Todd, this is okay. And that's all I needed was
Yeah.
somebody to say
To
that this
see
is
and
okay.
hear you and
That this is
support you.
okay. Like it's like you're a human being and you're gonna make mistakes and we're learning and we're gonna do this together.
Yeah.
Rather, you should know this by now and this back and
Right.
forth, all this stuff. And one of my coworkers, like, we went and did like a pronouncement and we
Mm.
got a coffee after because she was showing me and she was relatively new too. And she's like, Todd, I'm having a panic attack. I said, okay.
Mm.
And I said to her, I said, this is hard. Like, we're just doing this. I'm like, what's your self-care like when you leave? And she's like, yeah. Like my old self, my old nursing back in the day when I was like, whatever, would have been
Yeah.
like, this girl, like, what's your problem? What? And then I'd be like talking to my friends about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
workers, like, what's wrong with her? Like, now it's like,
Mm.
man, what can I do to help you? How
It's
are you
beautiful.
doing? Like, this is hard. Like, and I'm not thinking about myself as
Right.
much.
Beautiful.
And
Well,
that's what nurses need more of.
agreed. Agreed. Oh, Todd, this has been great. We've got just a minute or two left. And so you've given so many, I appreciate your stories and your experience and the way your outlook, and your trust and your faith is just beautiful and how you've transitioned this to how you can help others on their journey. And so I just want to see, do you have anything left on your heart that you want to make sure you share today with our group?
No, I think I kind of touched it. It just kind of came out. So maybe
I love
God kind of
it.
inspired it that way, and that's it. So no, I
Yes.
appreciate this and tapping, touching nurses that
Hmm.
need to understand and that we're all struggling and
Yeah.
we need help too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Where can people find you?
ToddAngelucci.com. So it's Todd with Angel with an Italian Ucci at it.
I like that.
Yeah, that's my site. It's got all,
Perfect.
the stories. It's got, if people are interested in taking that assessment, it's there. It's
Cool.
free. I do a free little debrief for anybody to, kind of help them understand. And if it's something that they want to explore, that's great. And I'm just like to connect with people and see how I could help others. Like a lot of people are trying to do things based on their passions and they feel kind of stuck because
Hmm.
you gotta it just understand how to walk through it, but also it's about connecting with others for
Oh,
sure.
100%. That's my podcast is called Nurse Connect. That's one of my top values.
It's all about connection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. Thanks again, Todd. It's been so awesome to chat with you today, and I'm really looking forward to keeping connected with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great time. Night. We'll see you next time. Bye.